The night that started it all. The night was unusually quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. Winter had arrived early this year, draping the small town in a biting cold that clung to the air like a persistent shadow. Most people were huddled in their homes, the warm glow of television screens illuminating their living rooms, or rushing through the streets, eager to escape the chill. At the edge of town, a small, unassuming gas station sat on a lonely stretch of road. Its fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting an artificial brightness over the sparse rows of pumps and the handful of cars that occasionally rolled in. It wasn't the kind of place anyone would visit by choice unless they had to. But for Alana, it was a lifeline, a job that kept her bills paid, even if it left her utterly drained. Behind the counter, Alana adjusted her weight from one foot to the other, the pressure in her lower back intensifying. 7 months pregnant, and on her feet for hours each night, she had become adept at masking her discomfort. Her uniform hung loosely over her petite frame, and her once bright eyes now carried a tiredness that seemed far too heavy for someone in their mid-20s. She glanced at the clock mounted on the far wall, its ticking almost mocking her exhaustion. Midnight was still 2 hours away. Her shift dragged on like molasses, punctuated only by the occasional ding of the door chime as a customer entered. Most were regulars, truckers on long hauls, night shift workers grabbing coffee, or teenagers on late-night snack runs. They rarely looked at her, let alone spoke more than a word or two. A rickety pickup truck pulled into the lot, and a man in a flannel jacket stepped out. Alana watched absently as he pumped his gas, her hands instinctively moving to rest on her belly. The baby kicked gently in response, as if to remind her why she endured these grueling nights. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to the little life growing inside her. "Just a little longer." The man in the truck finished filling his tank, gave a half-hearted wave, and drove off. The station was silent again, save for the faint hum of the refrigeration units. Alana leaned on the counter, her thoughts drifting to the bills piled on her kitchen table. She'd managed to scrape together enough for this month's rent, but next month was another question entirely. She was pulled from her thoughts by the deep, throaty hum of an engine. Alana's eyes flicked toward the lot. A sleek black car, a Mercedes, she realized, glided into view, its polished surface gleaming even under the station's harsh lights. It was out of place here, like a jewel in a junkyard. The car came to a stop near the pumps, and for a moment, nothing happened. Alana's curiosity piqued as the driver's side door opened. Out stepped a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine. He was tall, with sharp, salt and pepper hair that seemed perfectly styled despite the late hour. His tailored coat fit him impeccably, exuding a quiet confidence that turned heads without effort. As he walked toward the station, Alana straightened her posture and smoothed her uniform. The door chimed as he entered, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. His gaze wasn't condescending or dismissive, as she had braced herself for, but curious, almost as if he was trying to figure her out. "Good evening," Alana greeted him, her voice steady but polite. She'd learned to keep interactions professional, a shield against the vulnerability that came with her situation. "Evening," he replied, his tone smooth and calm. He picked up a bottle of water and a pack of gum, simple purchases that seemed oddly incongruous with his expensive appearance. As Alana scanned the items, she could feel his eyes on her, studying her in a way that made her self-conscious but not uncomfortable. "Long night?" he asked, breaking the silence. "They always are," she replied with a small smile, handing him his receipt. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I imagine it's not easy, working these hours in your condition." Her smile faltered for a moment. "Bills don't wait," she said simply, her tone tinged with quiet resolve. The man lingered for a moment longer than most customers, his eyes flicking briefly to her rounded belly before returning to her face. "What's your name?" "Alana," she replied, hesitant but polite. "And you?" "Robert," he said, offering a faint smile. "Nice to meet you, Alana." She wasn't sure what to make of him. Customers rarely asked her name, let alone engaged in conversation beyond the bare minimum. But there was something about Robert's demeanor, calm, genuine, and curious, that made her lower her guard just a little. "You've got a lot on your plate," he said quietly, almost as if to himself. "But you're handling it better than most would." Alana didn't respond immediately. Compliments weren't something she heard often, and she wasn't sure how to take one from a stranger. "Thanks," she said finally, her voice soft. Robert reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek business card. He slid it across the counter toward her. "If you ever need help," he said, his voice steady but sincere, "call me." Alana stared at the card, her mind racing with questions. Why would a man like him offer help to someone like her? Was this some kind of joke? "Why would you do that?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "Because someone once did the same for me," Robert replied simply. "And I believe in paying it forward." Before she could say anything else, he offered her one last nod and walked out, leaving her standing behind the counter, the business card still resting in her hand. She looked down at it, her fingers tracing the embossed name and phone number. It felt surreal, like something out of a dream. As Robert's car disappeared into the night, Alana couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was more than it seemed. The world she knew was small and predictable, but this felt like the beginning of something she couldn't yet understand. The weight of a decision. The business card lay on the small, chipped coffee table in Alana's apartment, its glossy surface reflecting the dim light of her single lamp. The room was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old building and the muffled sounds of a TV from a neighboring unit. Alana sat on the edge of her worn-out couch, her hands resting protectively on her belly as she stared at the card. It was simple yet elegant, with the name Robert Emerson printed in bold, clean letters. Below it, the words Emerson Consulting Group were followed by a phone number and an address downtown. The address alone made her stomach twist. It was in a part of Louisville she had never been to. The kind of place she had only seen in movies: gleaming skyscrapers, valet parking, and people who wore their success like a second skin. Her fingers hovered over the card. She couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over her since the encounter. Why would someone like him, someone who clearly had everything, want to help her? She had long learned that acts of kindness were rarely without strings. Yet his words lingered in her mind, gnawing at her skepticism. "Because someone once did the same for me." Her gaze shifted to the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, neatly arranged but overwhelming in their collective weight. Rent, utilities, a hospital bill from her last checkup. All unpaid, all demanding attention. She had managed to keep her head above water so far, but barely. With her baby due in just 2 months, the cracks in her carefully balanced life were becoming impossible to ignore. The next day, she couldn't focus. At work, every beep of the register felt louder, every customer's footsteps heavier. Her thoughts kept circling back to Robert and the strange offer he had made. Between shifts, she borrowed her neighbor's laptop to look him up. A quick search confirmed what she already suspected. Robert Emerson wasn't just anyone. He was the CEO of a major consulting firm, a philanthropist with a reputation for mentoring underprivileged youth and funding educational programs. The articles painted him as a man who had risen from humble beginnings, working odd jobs to put himself through college before catching a lucky break. He had built his company from the ground up, and now he spent much of his time giving back to the community. But for every glowing profile, there was a common thread filled with skepticism. "Probably just a PR stunt," one comment read. "Nobody gets rich by being nice," said another. Alana closed the laptop, her mind more muddled than before. The more she learned about Robert, the harder it was to ignore the possibility that his offer might be genuine. But trusting people hadn't served her well in the past, and she wasn't sure she could afford to take a leap of faith, not now when so much was at stake. That evening, as she prepared for her shift, she tucked the card into her pocket. Just in case, she told herself, though she had no idea what that meant. The walk to the gas station was brisk, the winter wind cutting through her thin jacket. Her feet ached with every step, but she pressed on, driven by necessity. The night passed uneventfully. Customers came and went, their faces blurring together in her tired mind. Around 2 a.m., when the station was at its quietest, Alana found herself pulling the card from her pocket and tracing the letters with her thumb. The name and number stared back at her, daring her to make a choice. What if he's just messing with me? She muttered to herself, setting the card down on the counter. What if he's serious? The thought terrified her. It wasn't just about the risk of being let down. It was about the possibility that she might have a chance to change her life, and the fear that she might not be strong enough to seize it. By the time her shift ended, she still hadn't decided what to do. She walked home under the pale light of a crescent moon, her breath visible in the cold air. The city was quiet, the streets empty, as if the world itself was giving her space to think. When she reached her apartment, she stood outside for a moment, staring up at the darkened windows. Her breath hitched as a memory surfaced, her mother's voice, soft but firm, echoing from years ago. You have to fight for what you want, Alana. The world won't hand it to you. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and dialed the number on the card. The line rang twice before a voice answered, calm and familiar. Robert Emerson. Alana froze. Her throat felt dry, and for a moment, she considered hanging up. But then she thought of her baby, of the tiny kicks that reminded her she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. Hi, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is Alana. We met at the gas station. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a warm, steady response. Alana, I was hoping you'd call. A leap into the unknown. The air in Alana's tiny apartment was thick with tension as she sat on the edge of her couch, phone pressed to her ear. The man on the other end of the line, Robert Emerson, spoke with a calm confidence that both unsettled and reassured her. I was hoping you'd call, he repeated. His tone was warm, not pushy, giving her room to respond. Alana hesitated, her fingers gripping the phone tightly. She had no idea what to say. 1,000 questions swirled in her mind, but none seemed coherent enough to ask. Finally, she settled on the simplest one. Why? She asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and suspicion. Why me? Why offer to help someone you don't even know? There was a brief silence on the line, as though Robert was carefully choosing his words. Because I've been where you are, he said finally. Maybe not exactly, but close enough to recognize the struggle. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most. Now it's my turn to pay that forward. His honesty caught her off guard. She expected a rehearsed answer, something vague and impersonal. Instead, his words carried a sincerity that made her want to believe him, even as doubt lingered in the back of her mind. That's kind of you, she said cautiously, but I don't think I'm the kind of person you're looking to help. And what kind of person is that? Robert asked, his tone gently probing. Alana hesitated. She thought of her late-night shifts at the gas station, her cramped apartment, and the stack of unpaid bills on her counter. Someone capable. Someone who's already on their way to making something of themselves. I'm just trying to get through each day. Robert chuckled softly, though not in a way that felt dismissive. That's where you're wrong, he said. The fact that you're still standing, still fighting, despite everything. You're already stronger than you give yourself credit for. I see potential in you, Alana. And I think, deep down, you see it too. His words struck a chord she hadn't expected. For so long, she had viewed herself as barely getting by, her dreams buried under the weight of survival. But hearing a stranger, someone successful and accomplished, acknowledge her resilience felt like a lifeline she hadn't realized she needed. What exactly are you offering? She asked, her voice trembling with cautious hope. A fresh start, Robert replied simply. Financial support to ease the immediate burden, help with childcare once your baby arrives. And if you're willing to put in the work, I'll cover your tuition so you can finish your nursing degree. You don't have to decide right now, but the offer stands. Alana's breath caught. It sounded too good to be true, like something out of a movie. But the sincerity in Robert's voice made it hard to dismiss outright. Why would you do all that for me? She asked again, needing to hear his reasoning one more time. Because I believe in investing in people, Robert said. And because someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I think you're worth the investment, Alana. But the choice is yours. They talked for a while longer, with Alana asking hesitant questions and Robert answering them patiently. By the time the call ended, she felt a mixture of emotions, hope, fear, and a strange sense of relief, as though a door she hadn't dared to knock on had suddenly opened. The next day, Alana couldn't focus on anything else. Her mind replayed the conversation over and over as she went through her routine. At the gas station, the familiar monotony of scanning items and making small talk with customers did little to distract her. Each time the door chimed, she half expected Robert to walk in again, though she knew it was unlikely. When her shift ended, she walked home slowly, the crisp night air clearing her thoughts. She felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Accepting Robert's help would mean taking a leap into the unknown, trusting a man she had met only once. But it would also mean giving her child a better chance at life. A chance Alana wasn't sure she could provide on her own. At home, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the card again. This time, it felt less like a lifeline and more like a challenge. Was she brave enough to accept help? Could she set aside her pride and her fear long enough to seize the opportunity? The answer came the following morning. Alana woke to the sound of her baby kicking, a strong and insistent movement that brought a smile to her face despite her exhaustion. As she lay there, her hand resting on her belly, she made a decision. "I'll do it," she whispered. "For you." Later that day, she called Robert again, her voice steadier this time. "I've thought about it," she said. "And if the offer still stands, I'd like to take you up on it." "It still stands," Robert replied, his tone warm. "You won't regret this, Alana." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Robert arranged for her to meet with a representative from a local nonprofit that provided support for single mothers. They helped her navigate the logistics of enrolling in a nursing program, securing affordable childcare, and even finding a better apartment closer to campus. Every step felt surreal, as though she were living someone else's life. True to his word, Robert covered her tuition and provided a modest monthly stipend to help with expenses. He checked in regularly but never overstepped, always making it clear that the choices were hers to make. For the first time in years, Alana felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that her future could be something more than just surviving. Her first day of classes was nerve-wracking but exhilarating. Surrounded by other students, Alana felt both out of place and deeply determined. She worked harder than she ever had, balancing late-night study sessions with early morning feedings after her baby was born. It wasn't easy, but she reminded herself of the promise she had made to her child, to herself, and to the man who had believed in her when she couldn't. Robert's quiet support became a constant in her life, a steady presence that never demanded gratitude, but always offered encouragement. And as Alana pushed forward, she began to see herself not as a burden or a failure, but as someone capable of achieving the life she had always dreamed of. The power of transformation. Alana's days transformed from a monotonous grind into a carefully orchestrated symphony of purpose. Early mornings began with her cradling her newborn son, Liam, in her arms. The world seemed quieter in those moments, filled only with the soft sounds of his breathing and the occasional gurgle of contentment. She would hum lullabies her mother used to sing, feeling the echoes of generations past in her voice. Her afternoons were a whirlwind of lectures, group study sessions, and clinical rotations at the local hospital. Nursing school was demanding, more than she had anticipated, but she thrived under the pressure. Every medical term she memorized, and every skill she practiced felt like another step toward the future she had once thought impossible. Evenings were equally packed. Alana would pick Liam up from the daycare program Robert had connected her with, its staff as supportive as they were understanding. They often marveled at her resilience, though she rarely felt as strong as they claimed. She would then head home to prepare dinner, balancing a fussy baby on one hip while flipping through her notes on pharmacology or anatomy. Despite the chaos, her life felt fuller, richer. Each day was a reminder that she wasn't just existing anymore. She was building something meaningful. The first time Alana saw Robert after their initial meeting at the gas station was at a small cafe downtown. He had invited her for lunch to check on her progress, and she had nervously accepted, unsure of how to thank him for everything he'd done. The cafe was elegant but unpretentious, its warm wooden interior filled with the hum of quiet conversation. When she arrived, Robert was already seated at a corner table, dressed as impeccably as ever. He stood when he saw her, offering a genuine smile that immediately put her at ease. "Alana," he greeted her warmly, gesturing for her to sit. "It's good to see you." "You too," she replied, settling into the chair across from him. She couldn't help but feel out of place, her simple cardigan and jeans a stark contrast to his tailored suit. "How's school going?" he asked once they'd ordered. His tone was conversational, but there was a genuine curiosity in his eyes. "It's a lot," she admitted, laughing nervously. "But I'm managing. Actually, I'm doing better than I thought I would. My professors seem impressed." "I'm not surprised," Robert said, his expression proud. "You're determined. That kind of drive is hard to ignore." Alana blushed, unused to such praise. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she said, her voice soft. Robert shook his head. "You're the one putting in the work, Alana. I just gave you a push. The rest is all you." As they talked, she found herself opening up in a way she hadn't expected. She told him about the long nights spent studying, the challenges of balancing school with motherhood, and the moments of doubt that crept in despite her progress. Robert listened intently, offering words of encouragement, but never platitudes. "You're not just doing this for yourself," he said at one point, his tone thoughtful. "You're setting an example for your son. One day, he'll look back and see how hard you fought for him. That's a legacy worth building." His words stayed with her long after the lunch ended. Months turned into a year, and Alana continued to excel. She began making connections at the hospital where she completed her clinical rotations, impressing the staff with her compassion and work ethic. Her instructors often singled her out as an example of what a nurse should be, not just knowledgeable, but empathetic and resourceful. At home, she found a rhythm with Liam. The daycare staff adored him, often commenting on how happy and curious he was. Alana made sure to carve out time every evening to play with him, read to him, and simply hold him close. He became her anchor, the reason she pushed herself to keep going even on the hardest days. Robert remained a steady presence in her life, though he never imposed. They met occasionally for coffee or a quick lunch, during which he would ask about her progress and offer subtle guidance. He never made her feel like she owed him anything, but his quiet support meant more to her than she could express. It was during one of these meetings, over coffee at a bustling cafe, that Robert shared something unexpected. "Do you remember when I told you someone gave me a chance?" he asked, stirring his drink absently. Alana nodded. "Yes. You said it's why you wanted to help me." He smiled faintly, his gaze distant. "I was in college at the time, struggling to make ends meet. My father had passed away, and my mother was doing everything she could to support us. But it wasn't enough. I was on the verge of dropping out when a professor noticed my situation. He connected me with an anonymous donor who covered my tuition and living expenses. That act of kindness changed everything for me." "Did you ever find out who it was?" Alana asked, intrigued. Robert shook his head. "No, but I've always believed that the best way to thank them is by paying it forward." His story resonated deeply with her. It was a reminder that kindness, even when it seemed small, could ripple outward in ways that were impossible to measure. By the time Alana entered her final semester, She was a different person. A shy, uncertain woman who had once doubted her worth had been replaced by someone confident and determined. Her classmates looked up to her, often seeking her advice or asking her to lead study groups. At the hospital, she was offered a mentorship opportunity, a chance to shadow a senior nurse and learn advanced skills. One evening, as she rocked Liam to sleep, Alana found herself reflecting on how far she had come. The memories of those long nights at the gas station felt like a distant dream, replaced by a future she could finally see taking shape. And at the center of it all was Robert, whose belief in her had set everything in motion. The test of gratitude and resolve. The dawn of Alana's final semester brought a mixture of emotions. The end was in sight, but so were the mounting pressures of her studies, motherhood, and the looming uncertainty of what lay beyond graduation. Every day was a balancing act, and though she had come so far, the weight of her journey was beginning to take its toll. One evening, as she packed her bag for the next day's classes, her phone buzzed. The name Robert Emerson lit up the screen. She hadn't spoken to him in a few weeks, their interactions having settled into a pattern of quiet support and sporadic check-ins. "Hi, Robert," she answered, trying to keep the exhaustion out of her voice. "Alana, good to hear your voice," he replied warmly. "How are things going?" "They're busy," she admitted with a small laugh. "But good. Just trying to keep my head above water." "I have no doubt you're doing more than that," Robert said. There was a pause before he added, "I wanted to check in about something. Are you free for lunch tomorrow? There's an opportunity I'd like to discuss with you." Her curiosity piqued. Alana agreed. The next afternoon, she found herself at a quiet bistro downtown, seated across from Robert. He looked as composed as ever, but there was a hint of excitement in his demeanor that she hadn't seen before. "I've been watching your progress," he began after they ordered. "And I have to say, you've exceeded every expectation I had. You're not just doing well, you're thriving." "Thank you," Alana said, her cheeks flushing. "That means a lot." Robert leaned forward slightly, his expression turning serious. "I'm bringing this up because I think you're ready for the next step. My company sponsors a community health initiative focused on underserved areas. We're looking for someone with both medical knowledge and first-hand experience of the challenges these communities face, someone who can connect with people on a personal level. I think you'd be perfect for the role." Alana blinked, her mind racing. "You want me to work with your initiative?" "I do," Robert said. "It's not a nursing position, per se, but it would utilize your training and your unique perspective. It's a leadership role, Alana, one where you can make a real impact." She sat back, stunned. The idea of stepping into a leadership position, especially one backed by someone like Robert, felt almost surreal. But with the opportunity came a flood of insecurities. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," she said hesitantly. "I'm still figuring out how to manage my own life, let alone lead others." "That's exactly why you're the right person for this," Robert said firmly. "You've lived through the struggles these communities face. You understand them in a way most people can't, and you've proven that you have the resilience and determination to rise above them." Alana didn't respond immediately, her thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and excitement. She had spent so long focusing on simply surviving that the idea of stepping into a role where she could help others felt almost too big to grasp. "Think about it," Robert said, sensing her hesitation. "The offer is there whenever you're ready." The next few weeks were a blur. Alana threw herself into her studies, determined to finish strong. But the conversation with Robert lingered in her mind. Every time she walked through the hospital during her clinical rotations, she found herself imagining what it would be like to work with the initiative he had described. Her instructors and peers began to notice a change in her. She spoke up more in class, took the lead during group projects, and approached her work with a newfound confidence. Her mentors often commented on her ability to connect with patients, her empathy setting her apart from her peers. One evening, after putting Liam to bed, Alana sat at her kitchen table, the offer from Robert replaying in her mind. She thought about the countless people who had helped her along the way, the daycare staff who cared for Liam, the professors who pushed her to excel, and of course, Robert, whose faith in her had never wavered. She realized that the opportunity he had presented wasn't just about her. It was about giving back, about using her journey to inspire and uplift others. The thought filled her with both fear and determination. A week before graduation, Alana called Robert. "I've thought about your offer," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "And I'd like to take it, if it's still on the table." "It is," Robert said, his tone warm. "I'm glad to hear it, Alana. You won't regret this." The following days were filled with preparations. Robert introduced her to his team, a group of passionate individuals dedicated to making a difference. They welcomed her warmly, impressed by her story and her drive. Alana quickly realized that this wasn't just a job. It was a calling, one that aligned perfectly with the person she was becoming. Graduation day arrived, a milestone that felt both triumphant and surreal. As Alana walked across the stage to accept her diploma, she scanned the crowd, her eyes landing on Robert. He sat in the front row, his expression calm but proud. Beside him was Liam, perched on the lap of a daycare worker who had come to support her. Seeing her son's wide-eyed curiosity and Robert's quiet encouragement filled her with a profound sense of gratitude. In her graduation speech, Alana spoke from the heart. She told the audience about her journey, about the struggles that had shaped her and the people who had helped her rise above them. She emphasized the importance of kindness and perseverance, her words resonating with everyone in the room. The weeks that followed marked the beginning of a new chapter. Alana stepped into her role with Robert's initiative, bringing her unique perspective and unwavering determination to the work. She traveled to communities much like the one she had grown up in, connecting with people who saw in her a reflection of their own struggles and dreams. With every life she touched, Alana felt herself growing, not just as a professional, but as a person. She realized that the journey she had started all those months ago at the gas station was about more than just her own success. It was about creating a ripple effect, inspiring others to believe in the power of change and the strength within themselves. And at the heart of it all was the simple truth that had guided her from the beginning. Kindness, when given freely and without expectation, could transform lives, including her own. The ripple effect of kindness. The sun streamed through the windows of the community center, filling the room with a golden glow that seemed to mirror the warmth of the people gathered inside. Alana stood at the front of the large conference room, facing an audience of families, local leaders, and her colleagues from Robert's initiative. The room buzzed with energy as people shuffled into their seats, their conversations punctuated by laughter and the occasional call of a child. This was the culmination of months of work, her first major project as a leader in the community health initiative. Alana had organized a free health and wellness fair, complete with medical screenings, workshops, and resources for families in underserved neighborhoods. The event had drawn a larger crowd than anyone had expected, and Alana felt both pride and nervousness as she prepared to address them. She glanced at the back of the room, where Robert stood with his arms crossed, a faint smile on his face. His presence, as always, was a steadying force, reminding her of how far she had come. Beside him, Liam sat on the lap of one of the daycare staff, his little hands clutching a brightly colored balloon. At 3 years old, he was full of energy and curiosity, his laughter a constant reminder of why she worked so hard. Alana took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. The room quieted, and all eyes turned to her. She wasn't the same woman who had once stood behind a gas station counter, unsure of her worth. She was confident now, her voice strong and steady as she began to speak. "Good afternoon, everyone," she said, her smile genuine. "Thank you all for being here today. This event is more than just a chance to access resources. It's a celebration of community, resilience, and the power of coming together to support one another." She paused, scanning the room. 3 years ago, I was in a very different place. I was a single mother-to-be, working long nights at a gas station, unsure of how I was going to make it through each day. I felt invisible, like the world had already decided what my future would be. Her voice softened, but it carried a quiet strength. But one act of kindness changed everything. A stranger saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He gave me a chance, not a handout, but an opportunity to work towards something better. She met Robert's gaze, her gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. That chance set me on a path I never thought possible. And today, standing here in front of all of you, I am reminded of the power of believing in someone, even when they can't yet believe in themselves. The room erupted into applause, and Alana stepped back from the microphone, her heart swelling with pride and emotion. As the event continued, she moved through the crowd, speaking with families, answering questions, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. It was the kind of work that felt meaningful, a direct way to give back to the community that had shaped her. Later that evening, after the last guest had left and the volunteers had begun packing up, Robert approached her. He was dressed casually for once, his suit replaced with a crisp button-down and slacks, but his air of quiet authority remained. "You did an incredible job today," he said, his tone warm but matter-of-fact. "The turnout was better than we could have hoped for." "Thank you," Alana replied, her smile tinged with exhaustion. "I couldn't have done it without your support." Robert shook his head. "You're giving me too much credit. This was all you, Alana. Your vision, your leadership, your hard work. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it." She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I think I'm starting to understand what you meant about paying it forward," she said. "It's not just about helping someone. It's about giving them the tools to help themselves, and then watching them do the same for others." Robert smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Exactly. And you're living proof of how powerful that ripple effect can be." As the weeks turned into months, Alana's work with the initiative expanded. She spearheaded programs that provided job training, mental health support, and childcare resources for single parents. Her ability to connect with people on a personal level made her a trusted figure in the community, and her story inspired countless others to believe in the possibility of change. But her impact didn't stop there. Alana began mentoring young women who were in the same position she had once been in. She shared her story openly, not to gain sympathy, but to show them that their circumstances didn't define their potential. Her mentorship program grew quickly, and soon, the women she had helped were mentoring others, creating a cycle of empowerment that reached far beyond what she had imagined. One day, as she sat in her small but cozy office, a knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. A young woman entered, her eyes wide with a mix of nervousness and hope. "Ms. Alana," the woman said, clutching a folder to her chest. "I just wanted to thank you. I got accepted into nursing school." Alana's smile lit up the room. "That's incredible," she said, standing to embrace the woman. "I'm so proud of you." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't have done it without you. You made me believe it was possible." As the woman left, Alana sat back in her chair, her heart full. She thought about the chain of events that had led her here, the late-night shift at the gas station, the encounter with Robert, and the choice she had made to trust him. It was a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. 3 years later, on a crisp autumn evening, Alana stood on the stage of a packed auditorium. She had been invited to speak at a national conference on community empowerment, her work now recognized far beyond her local area. Liam, now 6 years old, sat proudly in the front row, his wide grin a mirror of her own. As she addressed the audience, Alana's voice was steady and clear. "Kindness," she said, "isn't just a word. It's a choice, a decision to see the potential in others and to invest in their growth. It's a reminder that even the smallest gesture can spark a change that grows far beyond what we can see." She glanced at Robert, who sat among the audience, his expression calm but filled with quiet pride. "I stand here today because someone believed in me. And my hope is that each of you will leave here today ready to believe in someone else." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Alana's focus was on the faces in the crowd. She saw hope, inspiration, and determination reflected back at her. In that moment, she knew that the journey she had started years ago was far from over, and that the ripples of kindness would continue to spread. The applause from the auditorium echoed in Alana's ears as she stepped away from the podium, her heart pounding with a mixture of pride and disbelief. She had come so far from the uncertain young woman standing behind the counter of a gas station, her future a question mark. Now she was not only living her dreams, but helping others find theirs as well. As the audience began to disperse, a steady stream of people approached her, fellow professionals, young students, and even parents with children in tow. They thanked her for her words, shared their own stories of struggle and triumph, and asked for advice on how they could create change in their communities. Alana listened intently to each one, offering encouragement and taking mental notes of ideas she could implement in her own programs. After the crowd had thinned, Alana returned to her hotel room, her son Liam walking beside her with a spring in his step. "Mama, everyone was clapping for you," he said, his wide eyes shining with excitement. "Were you nervous?" She smiled and ruffled his hair. "A little," she admitted. "But then I thought about you and all the people I've met who remind me why I started this journey. That made the nerves go away." Liam beamed at her answer, and she felt a rush of gratitude for the bond they shared. Everything she had done, every late night and early morning, had been for him. And now, as he grew into a curious, compassionate boy, she could see the impact of her choices reflected in him. Later that evening, there was a knock at her hotel door. When she opened it, Robert stood there, his familiar calm presence bringing a wave of comfort. He held a small box in his hands, wrapped neatly with a simple ribbon. "I thought I'd stop by and congratulate you in person," he said, stepping inside. "You were incredible today, Alana. Truly." "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "It still feels a little surreal, standing up there and sharing my story. But seeing how it resonates with people, it makes it all worth it." Robert handed her the box. "This is for you," he said, a little something to mark the occasion. Alana opened it carefully, her breath catching when she saw the contents. Inside was a silver necklace, the pendant a delicate ripple design that seemed to shimmer in the light. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Robert, for everything." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've earned every bit of this success, Alana. Watching you grow and seeing the impact you're making, it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life." They sat together for a while, talking about the event and the plans Alana had for expanding her programs. Robert listened with the same attentiveness he always had, offering insights and encouragement, but never overshadowing her vision. As he left, he paused at the door. "You've created something extraordinary, Alana. And the best part, this is just the beginning." The years that followed proved his words true. Alana's programs expanded, reaching more communities and touching more lives. She became a sought-after speaker and consultant, her insights and empathy setting her apart in a world often driven by numbers and efficiency. But Alana never lost sight of her roots. She continued to mentor young women, sharing her story and helping them see their own potential. She stayed connected to the neighborhood she served, making it a point to meet with families and listen to their needs firsthand. Liam grew alongside her success, a bright and inquisitive boy who often accompanied her to events and meetings. He became her greatest cheerleader, his pride in her achievements shining through in every "That's my mom." He shouted when introduced to new people. On the 10th anniversary of her graduation, Alana hosted a special event, a gala to raise funds for her programs and celebrate the milestones they had achieved. The evening was filled with laughter, heartfelt speeches, and stories of transformation. Alana stood on stage, looking out at the faces of those who had been part of her journey: colleagues, community members, and of course, Robert. I started this journey because someone believed in me, she said, her voice steady and filled with emotion. But I stand here today because I chose to believe in myself. And now, I see that same belief reflected in all of you. Together, we've proven that kindness isn't just an action. It's a legacy. As the audience rose to their feet in applause, Alana felt a profound sense of peace. Her life had come full circle, the struggles of her past transformed into a future of purpose and hope. That night, as she tucked Liam into bed, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mama, are you happy?" he asked, his voice soft. Alana smiled, her heart full. "Yes, baby," she said, kissing his forehead. "I'm very happy. And it's all because I decided to take a chance." As she sat by the window with a cup of tea, gazing at the city lights, Alana reflected on the journey that had brought her here. It had started with a simple act of kindness, a stranger's belief in her potential, but it had grown into something much larger, a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of community, and the boundless possibilities that arise when we choose to lift each other up. And so, Alana's story became more than just her own. It became a reminder to everyone she touched that even the smallest ripple could create waves of change, transforming lives in ways no one could imagine.